These next few lectures are going to focus on a little bit of diversity in animals, and then how animals create heat, how they maintain heat, and then how they get rid of excess heat. The first thing I want to talk about is just how diverse the animal kingdom is. I know in this image here you see some plants, but the animal kingdom really extends from everything from sponges, which are marine organisms where all their cells are the same. They don't have any kind of differentiation in their cells. All the way through the jellies, the sea stars, the mammals, worms, bryozoans are another type of marine organism, bivalve, snails and slugs, worms, spiders, crabs, lobsters. There's so much diversity in the animal kingdom. And again, you can see some of them here, some tube worms. Planaria is like a fluke, a type of worm. Other types of worms, crabs, spiders, sea stars, frogs, fish, tigers, humans. All of these are animals, and all of them are going to have many strategies to maintain or not to maintain body temperature. However, one of the most important things to keep in mind is that chemical reactions are highly dependent upon optimal temperatures. And these chemical reactions, remember, is what makes the body function. It's how you break down your food, it's how you get energy, it's how you feel different feelings, it's how you sleep, how you stay awake, how you exercise. Everything is dependent upon chemical reactions. Therefore, the body must maintain an optimal temperature for which those chemical reactions are adapted. And this is going to differ between animals. Some animals are adapted to live in colder temperatures, and their chemical reactions, their enzymes that help those chemical reactions happen, will work better at those temperatures. And then some animals will be adapted for warmer temperatures, and again, those enzymes will be adapted for warmer temperatures. Something that happens at very, very high temperatures, like at 80 degrees Celsius, so very high temperatures, is the proteins will fall apart. Remember, a protein is a polypeptide chain that's going to fold based on the charges of those amino acids. At very high temperatures, those amino acids won't stay together on that polypeptide chain and it'll come apart. It's called denaturing. There are hydrogen bonds that are holding those amino acids together when they're folded, just like we saw hydrogen bonds in water. And we know in water, to get water to heat up, you need to break those hydrogen bonds. So we add heat, lots of heat, to heat it up to get those molecules moving, and then those hydrogen bonds break. The same thing will happen in a protein. So at high temperatures, proteins are going to denature and fall apart. Let's discuss some thermal relations, how animals are adapted to either maintain body temperature or get their body temperature through external means. There are three different thermal relations that we'll talk about, and there's a little bit of overlap here, but I'll explain. The first one are endotherms. Endotherms are animals that warm their body through metabolic processes or internal metabolism. So when you eat, you break those bonds. Remember, we talked about that releases energy in the form of heat. So when you are digesting food, you're heating up. So endotherms rely on food to keep them warm, metabolism of food. You can also metabolize fat, which you get internal nutrition from, and that will also create heat. And these are going to maintain a consistent body temperature. So endotherms are creating their own heat. Ectotherms are relying on their environment for their heat. Sun, air, water, wherever they are relying on their environment to keep them, to warm them up or to cool them down. The third one is poikilotherms. And poikilotherms are very similar to endotherms. They are also dependent upon the environment for their thermoregulation or for their body temperature. But poikilotherms are going to fluctuate a lot more than just standard ectotherms. An ectotherm, like a fish that lives in the ocean, their body temperature is dependent upon the ocean temperature. They will closely match that body temperature in most cases. but it won't fluctuate a lot because the ocean doesn't fluctuate that much in temperature. However, poikilotherms, think about a lizard that cools off at night and then sits out on a rock and basks during the day. They have much more variation in their body temperature. Therefore, poikilotherms are ectotherms, but not all ectotherms are poikilotherms. And as we discuss these three different thermal relations, think about the energy that is needed. It is going to take a much higher metabolism to be an endotherm than an ectotherm. So if you don't need a very high metabolism, or if you are incapable of eating that much food, then an ectotherm is a great adaptive strategy for you. However, if you are capable of eating a lot of food, or you need to keep your body temperature on your own, then you have adapted to be an endotherm. Homeotherms are animals that maintain a narrow range of body temperature. So homeotherms are generally going to be endotherms. However, in the example like we gave with the fish in the ocean, their body temperature might not change that much. They could potentially be classified as a homeotherm too. Humans are endotherms. We eat and we get heat from that, and we maintain our own body temperature. And we are also homeotherms. The average human temperature is about 98.6 degrees. When a human extends outside this normal temperature range, they compensate through physiological processes. We'll talk about some of these in a bit, but if a human becomes hypothermic or too cold, they'll begin to shiver. Shivering is a way to rapidly contract your muscles and create heat. If a human becomes hyperthermic or too hot, they begin to sweat in hopes that evaporative cooling on the surface of the skin will help reduce body temperature. Heterotherms are animals that generally maintain a stable body temperature, but might vary daily or seasonally. And you can think about like a bear that's going to hibernate. Their body temperature is going to decrease seasonally, and they would be considered heterotherms. Again, these animals are going to maintain a stable body temperature when possible, but they will let their body temperature fall when environmental conditions are going to preclude homeothermy. These animals will generally go through a period of hibernation or seasonal physiological reductions or torpor, which we'll talk about also. Heat's going to flow in three main ways. It will flow through conduction, convection, and radiation. Through these means, it's going to flow from high temperatures to low temperatures. Conduction will transfer heat through direct contact, and heat flow is going to increase with increased thermal conductivity, increased surface area, and increased temperature differences. Convection is similar to conduction, but it's going to rely on the movement of substances such as air or water to transfer heat. And finally, radiation is the transmittance of energy, generally from the sun or from another substance that has absorbed the heat from the sun and it's radiating off of that, like the ground, concrete, or rock or something like that. So let's use this animal, this rabbit, as an example to show you all three forms. And all three forms can be used at the same time. So the rabbit is conducting heat from the ground as well as transferring some of its heat back to the ground. Ever have someone warm your seat for you? That's using conduction. Conduction is using your body heat to warm the chair, so when someone sits in it, it's already warm. Radiation is also exchanging heat from the sun to the rabbit as well as from the rabbit to the surrounding air. Other objects around the rabbit are also radiating heat. The rabbit is losing heat through evaporation when it breathes, as well as through its skin. In still air, convection is occurring slowly. But if this was a windy day, convection would be transferring heat away from the rabbit somewhat rapidly. Think about standing in front of a fan on a hot day. the convection of the air blowing over your skin helps cool you. If it's hot enough, you're probably sweating. The evaporation of your sweat is also helping to cool you. Convection can also be the fastest form of heat transfer. Remember that we have said several times now that temperature is the measurement of the movement of molecules. The greater the molecular movement, the higher the temperature. Therefore, most biochemical reactions are affected by temperature. At colder temperatures, reactions are going to occur slower. At warmer temperatures, reactions are going to speed up. And remember, we talked about at very high temperatures, proteins will denature or fall apart, and they won't function properly at all. We also talked about the different thermal relations. There are a few ways animals can maintain body temperature. They can create their own internal heat, they can get heat from their environment, and they can try to prevent heat loss. And these are not mutually exclusive. More than one of these strategies can be employed at the same time, and often are. Think about you. When you're running on a hot summer day, you are getting heat from your environment. You're also creating a lot of internal heat, and you're probably sweating and using mechanisms to release heat. Endotherms, as we've mentioned, use internal heat produced through their metabolism, and this is called thermogenesis, the creation of heat. So again, thermogenesis, the production of internal heat through metabolic processes, and this is again through the breakdown of the food ingested. Endotherms are going to have a metabolic rate about 4 to 10 times higher than the metabolic rate of an ectotherm the same size. And you can see here, these are two animals in Costa Rica. I took these pictures. This is a coati and this is a crocodile. And they're approximately the same size. The crocodile was a juvenile, but this coati is going to have a much higher metabolic rate than this gator here. Again, we've mentioned several times now that this heat is created through the catabolism of food, or breaking down food. Approximately 75% of the heat stored in food, or the enthalpy of those food bonds, those chemical bonds, is going to be dissipated as heat during catabolism, or the breakdown of those molecules. The rest, about 25% of that energy is going to be used for ATP production, and we've talked about that too. What is also of note is that 85% of the heat produced in animals comes from muscle contractions. So the more active they are, the more heat they're producing, the more their higher their metabolism is, and the more food they're going to have to eat. So it's clear that endotherms need to create much more heat than ectotherms. They will need to eat more food because they're getting a lot of their heat from their food, and they'll also need to be more active because they're getting heat from their activity. When animals are heat deficient, when they need to create more heat than they can just through breaking down their food, the body has two different ways it can heat itself up. It can create heat, or thermogenesis, through shivering or non-shivering. Shivering, as you know, is uncontrollable muscle contractions. These muscle contractions will help create heat. What is interesting is that there's differences between normal muscle movement and shivering. During normal muscle movement, muscles are contracting together or in sync. You're controlling them. During shivering, muscles are contracting out of sync, and they're quivering in a random fashion. Both forms of contraction will create heat. Think about how hot you get when you're jogging. But during shivering, no mechanical work is occurring. You're not moving at all. You're just shaking almost. Therefore, all of the bond energy being released from that movement, from that ATP, is going to be used for heat production. Non-shivering thermogenesis uses a specialized tissue called brown adipose tissue, or BAT. This tissue is highly specialized fat with its sole function for thermogenesis. The entire enthalpy of fat, or heat content of that fat, of bat fat, is used for heat. Bat is a mammalian adaptation in hibernators, neonates, or cold-adapted species. Brown adipose tissue, or BAT, is going to be highly vascularized, so lots of blood vessels in it, highly innervated, so a lot of nerve cells, and cells are going to have a lot of mitochondria, and that's actually why it's brown adipose tissue, is because of all of the mitochondria in them. Non-shivering thermogenesis occurs in the mitochondria of these cells by short-circuiting the ATP synthase. Therefore, instead of storing the energy in the ATP bonds, the catabolism, or the breakdown of the fat, it uses the energy for heat. So you can see here on this message our mitochondria that we've seen before, and you're still going to go through the process of breaking down glucose, converting it to pyruvate. The acetyl-CoA is going to go into that citric acid cycle, and you're going to build up all those hydrogen bonds. And they're still going to go through the electron transport chain, but those hydrogen bonds are going to be used for heat. All of these reactions are going to create heat. So those hydrogen bonds are not going to go through the ATP synthase and rephosphorylate that ADP to the ATP. It's just going to release the heat created from all of these reactions. Our next lecture will talk about how animals regulate their body temperatures.